Have you ever come home expecting peace, only to find something so shocking that it leaves you frozen in place? That's exactly what happened to me the day I returned from my surgery. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? My name is Margaret, though most of my friends call me Maggie. I'm 72 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Des Moines, Iowa. My husband passed away 8 years ago, and though loneliness has visited me often, I've learned to make peace with it. My little house has become my anchor. Every wall holds a memory. Every drawer carries a story, and my bedroom especially feels like the heart of my home. It's where I have whispered prayers in the dark, read stacks of novels until I dozed off, and kept the quilt I stitched by hand during those long, quiet winters. That space has always been mine, private and steady, untouched by the rest of the world. The surgery I had wasn't dramatic, it was a hip replacement, the kind of thing many women my age face sooner or later. Still, the whole ordeal wasn't easy. 5 days in the hospital under harsh lights, 3 meals that tasted of nothing, nurses waking me every few hours. After that came 2 weeks at the rehabilitation center, where they insisted I practice my steps with a walker until my legs shook. I kept reminding myself that it was temporary, that soon I'd be back in my own bed. There's a special comfort in knowing that your home is waiting for you, that your favorite pillow and the worn grooves of your mattress will cradle you in a way no hospital cot ever could. While I was away, my son Daniel had offered to watch over the house. He's 44, works in IT, married to a woman named Lisa, and they have 2 teenagers. I hesitated when he asked for the keys, not because I didn't trust him, but because I'm private about my space. He promised he'd only stop in to water the plants, check the mail, and make sure nothing happened while I was gone. I wanted to believe him, and in truth, I was grateful. At my age, you learn that any help offered, even with small things, is worth accepting. So I handed him the keys, pushed down the flicker of unease I felt, and told myself everything would be fine. On the afternoon I finally returned home, my neighbor Joyce was kind enough to pick me up from the rehab center. Joyce is 70 as well, with a laugh that can brighten the whole street. She pulled up in her old Buick, helped me into the passenger seat, and fussed over whether I had my cane, my medications, and my paperwork from the doctors. The drive back was quiet except for the hum of the tires and the rustle of leaves outside. Autumn had painted the neighborhood with warm oranges and reds, and the sunlight draped every house in gold. I felt tired but hopeful. Home was just minutes away. When Joyce pulled into my driveway, I almost cried from relief. The white shutters, the small front porch, the maple tree leaning over the lawn, it was all just as I remembered. Joyce helped me up the walkway slowly, her hand firm under my elbow as I steadied myself on the cane. She hugged me tight at the door, promised to check on me later that evening, and left me with a smile. I slipped the key into the lock and opened the door. Instantly, something felt wrong. The air was different. Instead of the faint lavender scent I always carried from my linen spray, I smelled something sharper, like fresh paint and polish. My ears picked up the silence, but it wasn't a silence of familiarity. It was as though the rhythm of my house, the quiet hum of belonging, had shifted. My stomach tightened. I stepped inside and let the door close behind me. My cane tapped against the hardwood as I moved down the hallway, past the family photos hung neatly along the wall. There was Daniel in his graduation gown, Daniel holding his first baby, me and my late husband on our 25th anniversary. I glanced at them as I walked, taking strength from those smiling faces. Yet the unease grew heavier with each step. When I reached my bedroom door, I froze. My breath hitched, and I gripped the cane tightly. Something told me the moment I pushed that door open, nothing would feel the same again. Slowly, I turned the knob and stepped inside. My sanctuary was gone. The room I had left behind, warm with wood tones and soft quilts, no longer existed. In its place stood a stranger's space. My 4-poster bed, the one my husband and I had bought together when we were young, the one that had creaked under us as we laughed and talked late into the night, was gone. Replaced by a stark, modern bed frame, all straight lines and steel gray bedding. My quilt, the one I had sewn from scraps of fabric collected over years, had vanished. In its place lay a cold comforter, store-bought, lifeless. I scanned the room in disbelief. My oak dresser, the one that still held the scent of my husband's cologne, had disappeared. In its spot was a glossy white chest of drawers, empty, but for a few new shirts folded carelessly inside. My lace curtains had been replaced by blinds, harsh, sterile blinds that shut out the soft glow I loved in the mornings. Even the rug had been swapped out, my floral pattern gone, replaced by a geometric gray square that meant nothing to me. I stood there gripping my cane, my body trembling, not just from the weakness of surgery, but from a deeper ache. This wasn't just furniture. This was my life, erased piece by piece. I lowered myself slowly onto the edge of the new bed, which felt too firm, too foreign. The mattress didn't give in the way mine had, shaped to my body over years. My eyes scanned the corners. The pictures I had kept on the walls, me and my husband at the beach, my mother holding me as a child, were missing. The nightstand that had held my Bible and my reading glasses was gone, replaced by a sleek table with nothing on it. It felt like I had stepped into a hotel room, not the bedroom I had loved for decades. I pressed my hand against my chest, my heart thudding. Why would Daniel do this? Who gave him the right? Did Lisa suggest it? Was this their idea of a surprise, thinking I'd be grateful for something modern and new? But it wasn't new to me, it was theft. It was the erasure of my history, the dismissal of everything that mattered. My throat tightened as tears blurred my vision. I whispered out loud, as though to the walls themselves, "What have you done?" The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the faint creak of the blinds as a breeze touched them. I sat there for what felt like a long time, unable to move, staring at the space where my dresser had been, the empty wall where my wedding photo once hung. My memories had been stripped from me, and the house I had clung to all these years no longer felt like mine. And I hadn't even spoken to Daniel yet. I don't know how long I sat there on that strange bed, staring at the walls that no longer belonged to me. Time seemed to stretch, and for a while, I couldn't tell if I was more tired from the surgery or from the heartbreak of what I was seeing. My cane leaned against the nightstand, though calling it mine felt wrong because nothing in that room was mine anymore. Finally, I pushed myself to my feet. The pain in my hip flared, but I steadied myself and hobbled back toward the living room. Maybe Daniel had left some kind of note or explanation. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding, and my real furniture had been stored somewhere safe. I tried to calm myself with that thought, though a sinking feeling told me I was only clinging to false hope. As I walked through the house, I noticed more small changes. A throw blanket I'd crocheted years ago was missing from the couch. The lamp in the corner, the one I'd found at a flea market with my sister back in the 70s, was gone, replaced by something sleek and metallic. Even the rug in the hallway had been switched out. My eyes darted around, searching desperately for familiar anchors, but each room carried the same unsettling theme, stripped of warmth, refitted with cold modernity. I lowered myself into my recliner, the one piece that seemed untouched. The cushion still held my shape, and I clutched the armrests as though they were the only things keeping me tethered. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but anger bubbled up in me, hot and sharp. That's when I heard the sound of a key in the lock. My eyes flew open, and I turned toward the door. Daniel stepped inside, his arms full of grocery bags. He looked startled when he saw me sitting there.
"Mom,
"You're home already? I thought you weren't coming until tomorrow morning." His voice carried that mix of surprise and guilt that only a mother could detect. He set the bags down quickly and came toward me. "They discharged me early," I said, my tone flat. "Joyce was kind enough to drive me." Daniel smiled nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, that's great. I was just picking up some things for you, snacks, easy meals, that kind of stuff. You'll need to take it easy for a while." I studied his face, looking for some hint of explanation. Finally, I asked, my voice trembling, "Daniel, what happened to my bedroom?" He froze. His eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to me. "Oh, you noticed." "Of course I noticed," I said, my voice rising. "My bed, my dresser, my curtains, everything. It's all gone." "What did you do?" Daniel sighed heavily and sat down on the couch across from me. "Mom, listen. Lisa," and I thought it was time for an update. "Your old furniture was worn out, and we figured after your surgery, you'd appreciate something new, something more comfortable and supportive." "Supportive?" I snapped. "That bed was the one I shared with your father for 40 years. That dresser held every piece of his clothing until the day he died. You call that worn out? Those things were my life, Daniel." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for my anger. "I didn't mean it like that. I just thought, well, we thought, you want a fresh start. New chapter, you know?" I stared at him, my heart aching. "A new chapter doesn't mean erasing the old ones. You didn't even ask me. You had no right." Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Mom, the stuff was old. The mattress was sagging, the dresser drawers stuck half the time, and those curtains, come on, they were practically falling apart. We wanted you to have something nicer." My voice broke as I whispered, "Where are my things?" He hesitated. "Some of it we donated. Some of it we put in storage. Don't worry, it's safe." "Storage?" I repeated, my chest tightening. "Where?" He waved a hand. "A facility across town. I rented a unit. But honestly, Mom, it's probably time to let go of most of that stuff. You don't need it anymore." I felt as though he'd slapped me. "Don't need it?" "Daniel, those weren't just things. They were pieces of your father. Of my life. Every scratch, every faded fabric held a memory. And you just threw them away like garbage." "Donated," he corrected softly, but his voice carried no confidence. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. The ache in my hip was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. "You should have asked me," I whispered. For a moment, silence hung between us. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter.
"I'm sorry, Mom."
"I thought I was doing the right thing. Lisa said it would be a good surprise, and I wanted you to come home to something nice. I didn't think it would hurt you." I opened my eyes and looked at him. "That's the problem, Daniel. You didn't think. You didn't stop to consider what those things meant to me." He looked down at his hands, and I could see guilt flicker across his face. But then, almost defensively, he added, "You're always holding on to the past. Maybe it's time you start letting go." I shook my head slowly. "The past is all I have left of your father. Letting go isn't as easy as buying new curtains, Daniel." The room felt heavy, filled with words unspoken. Finally, he stood up. I'll call the storage place. We'll get your things back. But Mom, you really should try the new bed. It's supposed to be great for your back." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. He sighed, grabbed his groceries, and muttered something about putting them away. I sat in the recliner, staring at the floor, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand he bring back every single item immediately. Another part of me felt too tired, too worn down by the surgery and the disappointment, to fight. As he busied himself in the kitchen, I listened to the rustle of bags, the clatter of cans against shelves. The sounds felt intrusive, like strangers moving around in my home. I wanted to tell him to leave, to give me back my solitude, but I stayed quiet. When he returned to the living room, he tried to smile. "I got your favorite soup, chicken noodle. Thought it might be easy on your stomach." I forced a nod, though my chest was still tight with anger. Daniel glanced at his watch. "I've got to get back soon. Lisa's waiting with the kids. But I'll check on you tomorrow, okay?" I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded again. He leaned down, kissed the top of my head awkwardly, and left. The door clicked shut behind him, and silence filled the house once more. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where my life used to be. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor. Every shadow seemed to whisper the same truth. My home was no longer the same. My sanctuary had been violated, and the people I trusted most had been the ones to do it. The quiet after Daniel left felt heavier than the noise of his presence. I sat in my recliner, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the wall clock, and the occasional whoosh of a car passing outside. My hip throbbed, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were louder than any pain. I tried to imagine my husband, Frank, sitting in his usual chair across from me, the way he would every evening after dinner. He'd tilt his head slightly, fold his arms, and listen as I rambled about my day. Sometimes he'd chuckle and say, "Maggie, you worry too much." Other times he'd just nod quietly, his eyes soft and knowing. What would he say if he were here now? Would he tell me to forgive Daniel, to let it go? Or would he be just as outraged that our life together had been dismantled without my consent? The ache in my chest deepened. I wanted to believe Frank would defend me, but the truth is, he was always the peacekeeper. He would have tried to calm me down even if deep inside, he disagreed. I shifted in my seat and reached for the small end table beside me. The drawer there was one of the few untouched places in the house. I opened it slowly, relieved to see my familiar stack of old letters still inside, tied neatly with a faded ribbon. Frank's handwriting peeked through the envelopes, strong and steady. I pulled out the top one and ran my fingers over the paper. At least I still had these. For a while, I sat reading his words, letting them soothe me. The letters transported me back to when he was alive, back when the house still felt whole. I could almost hear his voice between the lines. But eventually, the light grew dim, and my eyes grew tired. I placed the letters back in the drawer carefully, as though tucking away pieces of my heart. Hunger nudged at me. Daniel had put groceries away, and though my anger simmered, I had to eat. I rose carefully, leaning on my cane, and made my way into the kitchen. The cabinets looked different. He'd rearranged them, of course. The cereal boxes weren't where I left them, the cans stacked in unfamiliar order. Even that small disruption felt like an intrusion. I finally found the soup he'd mentioned. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the can and poured it into a pot. The rhythmic stir of the spoon against the metal was strangely calming, a reminder that some things still followed a pattern I understood. When it was warm, I carried the bowl to the table and sat down. The soup was fine, maybe even good, but each spoonful tasted faintly of loneliness. Meals with Frank had always been filled with conversation, small jokes, shared glances, the comfort of another presence. Eating alone tonight, after everything that had happened, made the silence ring even louder. After finishing, I rinsed the bowl and set it in the sink. The clock read just after 7. The evening stretched before me like an unfamiliar road. Normally, I'd settle into my bedroom with a book, maybe knit a few rows on the blanket I'd been working on. But now, the thought of stepping into that alien room made my stomach twist. Still, I needed rest. The doctor had been clear. Healing required sleep. So, with a heavy heart, I made my way back down the hall. When I pushed open the bedroom door, the strangeness hit me all over again. The new furniture gleamed in the soft light from the lamp. The sterile smell of fresh paint lingered. I sat on the edge of the bed cautiously, testing it. It was firm, unfamiliar, and though my body sank into it slightly, I felt no comfort. It was like lying on someone else's life. I pulled the comforter over me and closed my eyes. But sleep didn't come. Every time I drifted close, a memory surfaced. Me and Frank unpacking boxes into the old dresser, us laughing as we struggled to hang the curtains just right, the two of us lying together in the creaky bed frame that now no longer existed. I turned over, restless, the new sheets scratching against my skin. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of a car door slamming outside. I blinked in the dim glow from the street lamp filtering through the new curtains. My heart jumped. For a moment, I thought Daniel had come back, but when I listened closer, the sound faded away. Just a neighbor, probably. Still, my nerves were frayed enough that I couldn't settle again. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed, wincing as the pain in my hip flared. Gripping my cane, I stood and shuffled back into the living room. The recliner seemed to call to me, its cushions molded perfectly to my body, its presence steady and familiar. I lowered myself into it with relief, pulled a thin throw over my lap, and let the hum of the refrigerator lull me. That's when the phone rang. The sound startled me. It was unusual for anyone to call this late. I reached for the receiver, my heart racing. "Hello, Mom." It was Daniel's voice, strained and uneasy. "Yes," I said cautiously. "What is it?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry again. I know you're upset, and I don't blame you. Lisa thought it would be good for you, but maybe we were wrong." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. His words softened something in me, but they didn't erase the hurt. "I appreciate you saying that," I said quietly. "But Daniel, you need to understand, you can't make decisions about my life without me. This is my home. My memories. You can't just sweep them away because you think they're old." "I know," he admitted. "I wasn't thinking. I don't know. I thought I was helping." There was another long silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end, as if he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Finally, I said, "If you want to help me, then bring my things back. All of them. Please." "I will," he said quickly. "I'll call the storage place tomorrow. I promise." I felt a small relief at his words, though I knew promises were easy to make and harder to keep. "Good," I said softly. "Because until then, this doesn't feel like my home anymore." "I'll fix it, Mom. I swear." We said goodnight and I hung up. For a while, I just sat there in the recliner, the phone resting in my lap. His voice had carried guilt, but also a kind of distance, as if he still didn't fully grasp the depth of what he'd done. I wondered if he ever truly would. The house around me felt both familiar and strange, comforting yet invaded. I listened to the night sounds, the creak of the house settling, the wind brushing against the windows, the faint chirp of crickets outside. Slowly, exhaustion began to press down on me again. I let my eyes close and drifted into a fitful sleep, the recliner holding me more securely than the new bed ever could. When I woke again, the room was bathed in the soft glow of a lamp I must have left on. My neck ached from the awkward angle of sleeping in the recliner, but at least my heart felt steadier than it had in the strange bed. The blanket had slipped down to my knees, and I tugged it back up, shivering slightly in the draft that always seemed to sneak in through the living room window. For a few minutes, I just sat there, letting the quiet wrap around me. The house felt almost normal again, if I didn't look down the hall, if I didn't let my mind wander to the bedroom. But reality always has a way of creeping back in. My gaze drifted toward the hallway, and the knot in my stomach tightened. I needed to see for myself what had been taken. I couldn't rest until I knew exactly what was missing, what pieces of my life had been uprooted. So, with a groan, I pushed myself out of the chair, leaning on my cane, and made the slow walk back toward the bedroom. This time, I looked with sharper eyes. The nightstand was new too. My old one had a faint burn mark on the corner from a candle Frank once left unattended, and I used to run my fingers over that scar, as if it were a relic of our life together.
Gone.
The mirror was different as well. No longer the slightly clouded glass that had reflected my younger face for decades. In its place was something pristine, soulless. Even the rug had been replaced, the pattern too bold, too modern for my taste. I opened the closet door with trembling hands. Relief washed over me when I saw my clothes still hanging there. At least Daniel hadn't touched them. I brushed my hand along the row of blouses, sweaters, and dresses, whispering a silent thank you for what remained. But the drawers below the closet told a harsher story, empty, except for a few new folded shirts Daniel must have bought. My stomach twisted. He hadn't just rearranged my life. He'd tried to rewrite it. I closed the closet, my hand lingering on the handle, and whispered to the empty room, "Frank, I'm so sorry. I didn't protect it." The words caught in my throat, and tears burned my eyes. I quickly wiped them away. Crying alone in the dark wouldn't solve anything. I needed strength, not weakness. I left the bedroom and returned to the living room, where I lowered myself into the recliner again. The clock on the wall ticked past 10. I thought about calling Joyce. She'd always been a good listener, but it was late, and I didn't want to bother her. Instead, I sat with my thoughts, replaying Daniel's words from earlier. You're always holding on to the past. Maybe it's time you start letting go. Was he right? Part of me wondered. Most people my age do start shedding their belongings, passing things down, simplifying. Maybe this was what he thought he was helping me with. But the way he'd done it, without asking, without even warning me, felt like betrayal. The difference between letting go and being robbed is consent, and he had taken mine away. I shifted in my seat, adjusting the blanket around my shoulders. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again. The night stretched long, but I wasn't ready to return to that strange bed. I dozed lightly, waking every so often to the creak of the house. Each time, my mind returned to the same aching question: why didn't Daniel trust me to decide for myself? Sometime after 11, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, steady crunches on the sidewalk. My heart leapt into my throat, but then came the gentle knock on the door. Margaret. It was Joyce's voice. I hurried to unlock the door, my cane clacking against the floor. When I opened it, Joyce stood there in her robe, her silver hair pinned up loosely. I saw your light still on, she said softly. I wanted to make sure you were all right. The sight of her nearly undid me. My voice wavered as I said, "Come in, please." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. We settled in the living room, me in the recliner, her on the couch. She looked around, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the changes. "This isn't your furniture," she said bluntly. I shook my head. Daniel replaced it while I was gone. My bed, my dresser, everything. He thought he was helping. Joyce's lips pressed into a thin line. Helping? By erasing your life. Tears welled in my eyes. That's exactly how it feels. She reached across the space between us, placing her hand gently on mine. Oh, Maggie. I'm so sorry. The warmth of her hand steadied me, and I told her everything. How I'd come home, how Daniel had tried to explain, how he'd promised to bring things back from storage. She listened quietly, nodding, her eyes full of sympathy. When I finished, she sighed. Children mean well, but sometimes they forget we're not children ourselves. We've lived lives, built memories, earned the right to decide what matters. He had no right to take that from you. I nodded, grateful for her validation. I feel like a stranger in my own house. Joyce squeezed my hand. Then you fight to take it back. Make him bring everything home. Don't let him decide for you. Her words gave me strength. We sat in silence for a while after that, just two old friends sharing the weight of the night. When she finally stood to leave, she hugged me tightly. Call me tomorrow if you need anything. And remember, you're not alone in this. After she left, I felt lighter, though the ache hadn't disappeared. Sometimes all you need is someone to stand with you in your hurt. The house settled into quiet again. I sat for a long time, thinking of Frank, of Daniel, of the strange balance between holding on and letting go. My eyelids grew heavy, and eventually I drifted into sleep once more, still in the recliner, still surrounded by pieces of a life that felt half-stolen. When I finally opened my eyes again, the room was filled with a faint, silvery light. It was the moonlight slipping through the curtains, casting pale stripes across the carpet. My back ached from another night in the recliner, but I didn't regret choosing it over that unfamiliar bed. At least here, I felt anchored in my own space, not displaced by Daniel's decisions. I pushed myself up slowly, my cane steadying me as I rose. The air was cool, and I drew the blanket tighter around my shoulders as I shuffled into the kitchen. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick from the wall clock were the only sounds. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, craving the comfort of a warm cup of tea to start the morning. As the water heated, I leaned against the counter and let my thoughts wander. Frank used to do this every morning, set the kettle, hum some old tune, and bring me a steaming cup before I'd even fully woken up. I could almost hear his low voice, slightly off-key, but filled with love. The memory was bittersweet, reminding me of what had been taken from me in the name of help. The kettle whistled, pulling me back to the present. I poured the hot water over a bag of chamomile, the steam fogging my glasses for a moment. As I sat at the kitchen table, sipping slowly, I resolved that I wouldn't let the day drift away in sadness. I needed to act. I reached for the phone and dialed Daniel's number. He answered after a few rings, his voice groggy.
Mom?
It's early. It's after 8. I replied, more firmly than I intended. We need to talk. A pause, then a sigh. About the bedroom again? Yes, I said. My voice trembled slightly, but I didn't back down. I want my furniture back. My bed, my dresser, my nightstand. I need them here. Mom, his tone was weary, as if I were a child nagging him. We went over this. Those things are old. They're in storage now. You have a brand new set. Why can't you just enjoy it? I felt the frustration rising. Because it isn't mine, Daniel. You don't understand. Those pieces hold my life, my memories. I don't care if they're scratched or worn. They're part of me. Silence stretched on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, all right. I'll bring some of it back today. The dresser, at least. But the bed. Mom, that mattress was bad for your back. You can't keep it. I don't need you to decide what's good for me, I said, sharper now. I'll take care of my own choices. Another pause, then a resigned, fine. I'll come by this afternoon. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, staring at the steam curling from my cup. My hands were shaking, not from weakness but from the adrenaline of standing my ground. It felt good, even if it left me drained. I carried my tea to the living room, settling again into the recliner. Outside, the day was waking, the faint rumble of a garbage truck down the street, birds calling from the trees, the golden light of the sun climbing higher. The world looked ordinary, yet everything inside me was unsettled. Around 9, Joyce called. How are you feeling this morning, Maggie?
Her voice was a bomb.
I told her about my call with Daniel, about how he'd promised to bring the dresser back. Good, she said firmly. Don't let him wiggle out of it. Stand there and watch him put it back where it belongs. Her confidence bolstered mine. Would you come over later? Just to be here when he comes. Of course, she said without hesitation. I'll bring some muffins. We'll face it together. When I hung up, I felt a little less alone. The hours drifted slowly as I busied myself with small tasks, watering the plants, folding a load of laundry, dusting the shelves. Each object I touched reminded me of the life I had built in this house, a life I wasn't ready to surrender. The framed photos of Frank and me at the county fair, the vase my mother had given me when I married, the crocheted blanket I'd made one winter when my hands were younger and steadier. All of it carried weight. By noon, I had reheated some soup for lunch. Joyce arrived shortly after, carrying a bag from the bakery. She set it on the counter and gave me a knowing smile. Ready to stand your ground? I nodded, though my stomach fluttered with nerves. We sat together in the kitchen, sipping tea and nibbling on the muffins, waiting. Around 2, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. My pulse quickened as he knocked and then let himself in, carrying the faint scent of sawdust and aftershave with him.
Mom.
Joyce, he said, forcing a polite smile. Daniel, Joyce replied, her tone cool but not unfriendly. He shifted uncomfortably under her gaze before turning to me. I brought the dresser and nightstand. They're in the truck. But the bed, Mom, I really don't think it's safe for you anymore. I met his eyes. I'll decide what's safe for me. Please just bring it back. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly frustrated. All right, but I can't move it alone. I'll need help. I'll call someone, I said. A neighbor, perhaps. Joyce spoke up then, her voice firm. Daniel, your mother is asking for her things. If she wants them, she should have them. That's not negotiable. He looked between us, his jaw tight, but finally he nodded.
Fine.
I'll bring everything back by tonight. But, Mom, if your back pain comes back, don't say I didn't warn you. Thank you, I said, ignoring his attempt at guilt. He carried in the dresser and nightstand, setting them back in the bedroom. When he left again to retrieve tools for the bed, Joyce leaned over to me and whispered, "See, you're stronger than you think." Her words warmed me. The rest of the afternoon passed with a strange mix of tension and relief. Daniel returned with a neighbor to help move the bed, muttering under his breath as they maneuvered it through the hallway. Finally, when the familiar frame and mattress were back in place, I felt something inside me unclench. Daniel wiped his brow, looking tired. "There. Happy now?" "Yes," I said simply. "Thank you." He shook his head but didn't argue further. "I'll head out. Call me if you need anything." When he left, Joyce and I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, looking at the restored space. The dresser was slightly scratched, the bedspread a little faded, but it felt like mine again. Tears pricked my eyes. "It's not perfect, but it's home." Joyce hugged me tightly.
Exactly.
"And don't let anyone take that from you again." That evening, after Joyce left, I stood in the bedroom alone. I ran my hand across the familiar dresser, opened the top drawer where I kept Frank's watch, and lay down on my own bed. The mattress sagged a little, the spring squeaked, but it cradled me with the comfort of decades of memories. As I closed my eyes, I whispered into the quiet, "I'm home, Frank. Truly home." And for the first time since returning from surgery, I felt like I belonged again. That night, sleep came easier. The mattress, though worn, carried the shape of years, the faint dip where Frank had once rested beside me. I woke once or twice, listening to the creaks of the house, but each time I sank back into the bed, comforted by its familiarity. By morning, I felt stronger, as though something fragile in me had been stitched back together. The smell of coffee brewing coaxed me out of bed. I made it slowly, leaning on my cane as I moved about the kitchen. The sun streamed through the curtains, painting the table in a warm glow. It felt like a small victory to sit with my coffee and know that the bedroom behind me was once again mine. I took my time with breakfast, savoring the quiet. But as the minutes passed, a new thought began to creep in. What had Daniel done with the things he didn't bring back? The dresser, the bed, and the nightstand were here now, yes. But what about the smaller treasures? My letters, tucked away in drawers. The little jewelry box Frank had given me on our 10th anniversary. Even the stack of old journals I'd kept since my 20s. I hadn't seen them yet. Panic fluttered in my chest. I left my plate half-finished and hurried, well, as quickly as I could, to the bedroom. I opened the dresser drawers one by one. Empty, except for the new clothes Daniel had folded inside. My heart sank. I pulled open the bottom drawer, where Frank's watch had been. The watch was still there, thank God, but the bundle of letters tied with ribbon?
Gone.
I checked the nightstand, rifling through it, then the closet drawers. Empty. I sat down hard on the bed, my breath shallow. He hadn't just swapped out furniture. He had taken parts of my history, pieces of me that no one else had the right to touch. I grabbed the phone and called him, hands trembling. He answered on the second ring. "Mom." His voice was guarded, as though he already knew what this was about. "Where are my letters?" I demanded. "And my journals? My jewelry box?" They weren't in the drawers. There was silence, then a heavy sigh. "Mom, some of those things were falling apart. The papers were yellowing, the ink fading. I didn't think they were worth keeping." His words hit me like a slap. "Not worth keeping?" My voice cracked. "Those were my life, Daniel. My words, my memories, my love letters from Frank. How could you decide they weren't worth keeping?" "I thought I was doing you a favor," he said, defensive now. "I didn't want you clinging to the past. You need to live in the present, Mom. You're not 20 anymore. Those old papers, they're just clutter." My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. Clutter? Those letters were the heart of my marriage. My journals held every joy, every grief I've lived through. "And you?" My throat closed for a moment. I forced the words out. "You threw them away?" He hesitated. "Some of it's in the garage. Boxes I haven't gotten rid of yet." I can bring them back if you want, but… Mom, you need to understand I was only trying to help. My anger surged, hot and steady. Bring them back today. All of them. Every box, every scrap of paper. If you care about me at all, you'll do it. I'll see what I can do, he muttered, then ended the call. I sat on the bed, gripping the phone, my chest heaving. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else he had done. Furniture could be replaced. But words, memories, once destroyed, they were gone forever. The hours dragged as I waited. I couldn't focus on anything else. Around noon, Joyce knocked and came in, carrying a basket of fruit. But one look at my face, and she set it down quickly. What happened? She asked, alarmed. I told her everything, my voice breaking in places. She listened, her brow furrowed, her lips pressed tight. That boy, she muttered, shaking her head. He's forgotten what it means to respect someone's story. Those journals, those letters, they're pieces of you, Maggie. He had no right. Tears spilled down my cheeks. What if he already threw them away? What if they're gone forever? Joyce put her arms around me, holding me close. Then we'll search every box, every bag. And if some are gone, you'll still have the strength of remembering. But don't give up hope yet. Her comfort steadied me, but the ache lingered. By mid-afternoon, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway again. He came to the door with 3 cardboard boxes in his arms. He set them down in the living room without meeting my eyes. There's more in the garage, he said shortly. These are the ones I hadn't gotten rid of yet. I didn't answer, just bent over the nearest box, lifting the flaps with trembling hands. Inside, I saw the faded blue covers of my journals, stacked neatly. My breath caught. I reached for one, running my fingers over the familiar texture, tears blurring my vision. They're here, I whispered. Relief and grief mingled in my chest. The second box held letters, though fewer than I remembered. My heart ached as I shuffled through them. Had some been lost already? The third box contained odds and ends, photographs, birthday cards, small keepsakes. Is this all of it? I asked, my voice tight. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. There might be more in the dumpster at the storage place. But, Mom, you don't need every scrap. Don't you think? I cut him off, my voice shaking but firm. Don't tell me what I need. These are my memories. If you throw them away, you throw me away. He looked stricken then, as though he finally realized the weight of what he'd done. I'm sorry, he murmured. I thought I was helping. Then stop helping, I said sharply. Start listening. For once, he had no reply. He left quietly, promising to check the storage dumpster, though I doubted he truly would. When the door closed, Joyce helped me carry the boxes into the bedroom. We stacked them by the dresser, and I sat down beside them, touching each one as though to reassure myself they were real. See,
Joyce said gently.
Not all is lost. But even as she spoke, I felt the hollow where the missing letters should have been. A piece of my life was gone, maybe forever. That evening, after Joyce left, I sat at the kitchen table with one of the journals. I opened it carefully, the binding cracked but intact. My own handwriting stared back at me, looping and uneven, carrying me back decades. I read aloud softly, as though Frank might hear me wherever he was. May 12th, 1969. Frank and I sat on the porch swing tonight, watching the fireflies. He told me he couldn't imagine a life without me, and I believed him with all my heart. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I closed the journal gently, holding it to my chest. I had fought for this piece of myself, and though the battle left me weary, I felt a quiet pride. Daniel might have tried to erase my past, but I wouldn't let him succeed. Not while I was still here to remember. The next morning began softly, with a pale light seeping through the curtains and the sound of sparrows chattering outside the window. For the first time in days, I woke in my own bed without the weight of dread pressing on my chest. My journals, the letters, the keepsakes, they were all there in boxes stacked neatly by the dresser, like loyal sentinels standing guard over my history. I lay still for a while, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how close I had come to losing them. The thought made me shudder. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was my younger self speaking across time. It was Frank's voice, captured in letters that smelled faintly of cologne even after all these years. It was birthdays, arguments, reconciliations, dreams I dared to write down when I was brave enough to believe in them. I eventually pushed myself upright and reached for the cane leaning against the bed. My body ached, but I was determined to start the day with intention. I shuffled to the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at the table with one of the journals open in front of me. The words danced in the morning light, carrying me back to a time when the world felt larger, possibilities endless. Halfway through my cup, a knock came at the door. My heart skipped, and for a moment I thought it might be Daniel again. But when I opened it, Joyce stood there with a small smile and 2 paper bags in her arms. "Thought you could use some company," she said, holding up the bags. "I brought scones from the bakery." I smiled, stepping aside to let her in. "You always know just what I need." We settled at the table, spreading out the scones and butter. Joyce eyed the open journal and the boxes stacked nearby. "Did you sleep better?" she asked gently. "Much," I said, "though I keep thinking about what might have been lost. Some letters are missing. Maybe gone forever." She reached across the table, her warm fingers curling around mine. "Then you treasure what remains. And you write more, Maggie. Keep the story going." Her words lingered with me as we ate. When the plates were cleared, I fetched a pen and notebook from the drawer. For the first time in years, I began writing not just about the past, but about yesterday, about the pain and the anger and the unexpected strength it stirred in me. Joyce watched with approval. "That's it," she said softly. "Take back the pen. Make sure no one else writes your story for you." We spent the late morning sorting through one of the boxes together. We found old photographs tucked between letters, faded but still sharp enough to summon memories. There was one of Frank and me at a summer picnic, his arms slung casually around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something out of frame. My chest ached, but in a sweet way. "Look at us," I whispered. "So young. So sure we had forever." Joyce smiled wistfully. "In a way, you did. Not everyone gets a love that leaves marks this deep." I nodded, touched by her words. Around noon, the phone rang. I braced myself, knowing it would be Daniel. I let it ring twice before picking up.
"Hi, Mom," he said.
His voice was hesitant, less certain than usual. "I wanted to check on you. Did you get the boxes I brought back?" "Yes," I said evenly. "But not all of it. Some things are missing." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to the storage place later today. I'll look in the dumpster. Maybe some of it's still there." "You'd better," I said firmly. Then softer. "Daniel, you hurt me. More than I can explain. You can't take pieces of someone's life away just because you think you know better." "I know," he admitted, his voice low.
"I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't think about it that way."
"I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" I asked. "From my own memories? From my love for your father?" His silence spoke louder than words. Finally, he said, "I'll do what I can to make it right." When I hung up, Joyce shook her head. "He means well, but meaning well doesn't excuse carelessness." "No," I agreed. "But maybe he's learning." The afternoon passed in a gentle rhythm. Joyce left after lunch, promising to return in the evening with a casserole. I spent the hours slowly going through the boxes, setting aside the things I wanted displayed again, the photo frames, the jewelry box, the small trinkets Frank had brought me from his travels. Piece by piece, I restored my bedroom, not perfectly, but enough to feel like home again. As I worked, I thought about the way time steals from us whether we agree to it or not. Wrinkles deepen, hair grays, people we love disappear. We accept those losses because they're beyond our control. But when someone we love takes things from us before we're ready, it feels like betrayal layered on top of time's theft. Evening arrived with a golden glow slanting through the windows. Joyce returned as promised, casserole in hand. We ate together, laughing softly about small things, the way we had for decades. For a little while, the heaviness lifted. After dinner, when she had gone home, I sat in the recliner with one of Frank's letters. His handwriting was slanted and bold, full of energy. I read aloud. "My dearest Margaret, every day I spend away from you feels like a year. But knowing I'll come home to you makes it bearable. Don't ever doubt how much I love you." The words blurred as tears welled, but I kept reading, my voice trembling. It felt almost like he was here, speaking through the years. When I finally set the letter down, I whispered into the quiet, "They tried to erase you, Frank. But I won't let them. Not ever." The night settled deep, the house growing quiet again. I turned off the light and sat in the darkness for a while, listening to the familiar hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. My heart was tired but steadier. Daniel had shaken the foundation of my world, but I was still standing. And I realized then, with a kind of calm certainty, that the day would not be remembered for what he tried to take, but for what I had reclaimed. I carried the journals back to the bedroom, stacking them carefully by the nightstand. Tomorrow I would read more. Tomorrow I would keep writing. Tomorrow I would continue to stitch my story back together, thread by fragile thread. And with that thought, I slipped beneath the familiar quilt, letting the weight of memory and the stubborn strength of survival carry me into sleep. The sun was already high when I stirred, the warmth pressing through the curtains. My body felt heavier than usual, but not from pain, more from the weight of everything the last day had carried. I rolled onto my side, staring at the stack of journals and letters by the nightstand. They seemed to glow faintly in the morning light, like sentinels guarding not just my memories, but also my resolve. I lingered in bed, listening to the hum of the neighborhood. A lawnmower starting 2 houses down, a dog barking, the faint rattle of someone's garbage bin being wheeled to the curb. Ordinary sounds, but grounding ones. After all the upheaval, I needed the comfort of normality. When I finally sat up, I reached for one of the journals. I opened to a random page and read an entry from 1983. It was about Daniel. Actually, he'd been 8 at the time, obsessed with dinosaurs. I had written about how he begged Frank to take him to the Natural History Museum, how his eyes had lit up when he saw the towering skeleton of the T-Rex. I smiled at the memory. Even then, Daniel had been so full of determination, so sure he knew more than anyone else. I traced the words with my finger, wondering if perhaps his need to help me now came from that same stubbornness. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it softened the edge of my anger. After breakfast, just toast and tea, simple and steady, I dressed slowly and decided to sit outside for a while. The air was crisp, the kind of late summer day that hints at fall but still carries warmth. I settled into the porch chair, my cane resting by my side, and watched the street. Children on bicycles zoomed past, their laughter ringing out. A young mother jogged by with a stroller. Life moved forward as it always does. And I sat there, quietly grateful that I still had the chance to witness it, even in small ways. Around mid-morning, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. My chest tightened, but I stayed seated, letting him come to me. He climbed out slowly, carrying 2 more boxes. His face was serious, his eyes downcast. "Morning, Mom," he said softly. "Morning," I replied, my voice steady, but not unkind. He set the boxes down on the porch. I went back to the storage place, dug through the dumpster. I found some more. Not all of it, but some. I leaned forward, my heart pounding as I opened the first box. Inside were bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbons. My breath caught. These were the ones I thought were gone. I lifted them gently, pressing them to my chest. "Oh, thank God," I whispered. The second box held scraps of things I hadn't realized I'd missed. Birthday cards from Daniel when he was small, postcards Frank had sent from his business trips, even an old recipe book with Frank's scrawled notes in the margins. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't just from sorrow. They were from relief. Daniel sat on the porch step, watching me. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly. "I didn't understand. I thought I was helping, but I see now I wasn't. I should have asked. I should have listened." I studied him for a long moment. He looked smaller somehow, humbled. Not the confident man who thought he always knew best, but the little boy who once stood in awe before a dinosaur skeleton. "You hurt me, Daniel," I said, my voice trembling. "More than you know. You made me feel like my life didn't matter anymore. Like I was just clutter to be cleaned up." His eyes filled with tears. "That's not how I see you, Mom. I swear. I don't want you drowning in the past. I thought if I cleared some of it away, you'd feel lighter." I shook my head slowly. Memories don't weigh me down. They hold me up. They remind me of who I am, who I loved, what I've survived. Without them, I'd be nothing but an old woman sitting in an empty house. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I understand now. And I'll never do something like this again. I promise." Silence hung between us, broken only by the sound of a sparrow landing on the porch rail. I reached out, placing my hand over his. His fingers curled around mine, warm and trembling. "You're my son," I said softly. "And I love you. But love doesn't mean I'll let you erase me. Do you understand?" He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks.
"Ida."
"And I love you too, Mom. More than anything." We sat like that for a while, holding hands in the morning sun. Eventually, he helped me carry the boxes inside. We placed them by the dresser, and I felt a deep sense of restoration, as though the house itself had exhaled. Daniel lingered a bit, asking if I needed anything, if I wanted him to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom. "Not today," I said gently. "Today, I just want to be." He kissed my forehead before leaving, and I watched his car pull away with a mixture of sorrow and love. Family is complicated, I thought. Full of wounds and mending, of misunderstandings and forgiveness. The afternoon unfolded quietly. I made myself a sandwich, then sat at the table with one of Frank's letters. I read it slowly, savoring each word, as if he were speaking directly into my ear. Later, I pulled out my notebook and began to write again. I wrote about the fear of losing everything, about the relief of having some pieces returned, about the fragile thread that binds mothers and sons even when they hurt each other. The pen moved steadily, the words spilling out like water finally freed from a dam. By evening, Joyce stopped by once more. I showed her the boxes Daniel had returned, and she clapped her hands together in delight.
"See?
Not all lost. And maybe he's learned something too." I nodded. "We both have." She stayed for supper, and we talked until the sky turned indigo and the first stars appeared. When she finally left, the house felt quieter, but not lonely. The boxes in the bedroom, the journals on the nightstand, the letters in my lap, they filled the silence with voices from the past, reminding me that I was never truly alone. As the night deepened, I sat in the recliner with the last of my tea. The day had been long, but it had given me something I hadn't expected, a sense of reclamation. Not just of my belongings, but of myself. I thought of Frank, of his steady love, of the words he had left behind. I thought of Daniel, learning, slowly, painfully, that I was still here, still deserving of respect. I thought of Joyce, her loyalty a balm in the storm. And as I finally turned off the light and made my way to bed, I whispered into the darkness, "I am still me, and I will not be erased." The quilt settled around me, familiar and warm. The night hummed with quiet, and for the first time since I'd returned from surgery, I felt whole again.